Thank you, Presiding Officer. And let me just respond to a couple of things that have come up in the debate. First of all, on beavers, I share John Scott's concern about the Tayside beavers. There are now 550 of them descended from what we must remind ourselves were illegally released or escaped, perhaps, but illegally released beavers. The government is picking up the tab for someone else's illegal activity, and I wish we didn't have to do that. But there we are. I do want to pursue the point that Mark Ruskell made on climate change. And again, I think John Scott and I, to a certain extent, will make common cause on this. Because what Mark Ruskell asked for, in the context of how we deal with farming going forward, is a net zero farming sector. Emitting net zero. Now, that is actually something that can damage the whole climate change agenda to move the whole of our environment to net zero. It would be perfectly easy to move the human race to net zero emissions, for example. You just remove all humans from the surface of the planet, you've achieved it overnight. But of course, that's not what you're going to do. And in asking net zero in farming, you're making a similar suggestion. But equally, I'm really not going to have time. Do forgive me, I'm really watching the clock. I will be caught up, I'm sure. But the real point is that we want to have net zero across all our sectors, but not in every sector. Because we want to spend the pounds to get to net zero where it is most effective. But we also have to remember that farmers don't get enough credit for the efforts they're making. The work that is done in forestry is not attributed to the farming sector, for example. We have days now where all our electricity comes from wind farms. Where are the wind farms? They're actually on agricultural farms, by and large, but not a single part of that climate change benefit is attributable to farmers in the numbers that we have. But the bottom line is we've got to spend the money on climate change mitigation and reduction in the most cost-effective way. If putting it into farming is the way that we get the greatest reduction for every pound, then we do it there. But if it is more likely, we put it into insulating houses. If it is more likely, we put it into decarbonising our transport sector. That's where we should put it. But if for doctrinaire reasons we decide we put it into farming, where it may not be the greatest bang for our buck, we actually damage our ability overall to reach net zero on climate change. So we need to be very cautious about these, do forgive me, Mr. Ruskell, simplicist views of a complex issue. Now, I've got 1 minute to go, Presiding Officer, so do forgive me, Mr. Ruskell. We'll have a chat afterwards. But I do come back to the core issue of farming and support for it, which is at the heart of the motion that we're debating. And I found it somewhat baffling when Mr. Cameron made his remarks, and indeed Mr. Mountain as well, when I look at what the NFUS briefing to us actually says. It says, it's the view of the NFUS that stability and simplicity, the government's document, effectively captured the recommendations from various expert groups appointed by the government in recent years. In other words, they're saying it's been a pretty good thing. Now, it's not uncritical and absolute support. I would never expect that from farmers. But they also say it is the view of the NFUS that if the steps to change approach were to be adopted, much of which is required by the way of future support, Scottish agriculture could be delivered with greater efficiency in terms of funding, process and outcomes. So the farmers have got the message, they know where we need to go, and I look forward to continue to engage with farmers in my constituency and across Scotland on the many occasions that present themselves. And indeed, I hope this year at the Tara Show, once again, to be sitting next to Mr. Gove, and I hope we'll be able to account for what the UK government have done in the period since the 29th of March. I'm not holding my breath.